I stood at the back of the room holding the blue blanket I had spent months making, each stitch a quiet memory. The room was full, everyone smiling, plates clinking, laughter bouncing off the walls. Then he stood, my son. He raised his glass and I held my breath. He smiled, looked straight at her and said, "This is the woman I recognize as a true mother. I wish she had raised me." The words didn't echo. They landed, heavy right inside my chest. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just held the blanket tighter, as if it could steady me. He never looked my way, not even once. I walked out without a sound, without a glance from anyone. But that night, I packed something more than silence. And by morning, they would learn what it means to erase the one who gave everything. Thank you for being here with me, my friends. Before I go any further, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever felt like someone slowly pushed you out of a place you once belonged, stay with me. Because this isn't just about one evening. It's about all the moments before it that slowly led me to that door. He wasn't always like that. Not my boy. I remember when he was small and feverish, clinging to my shirt, burning up while I sat beside him all night with a cool cloth and a prayer. I'd whisper stories just to keep him calm. I used to carry him in one arm while flipping pancakes with the other. When the lights went out because we couldn't pay the bill, I told him we were camping. When the fridge was empty, I made it a game. Let's see what kind of soup we can make today. He laughed, not knowing I went to bed with an empty stomach just so he wouldn't. I worked long shifts, cleaned offices after hours, folded clothes at the laundromat, took in sewing when I could find it. I missed birthdays, not because I forgot, but because I was in someone else's kitchen scrubbing their floors to buy the gift he'd smile about the next day. He never saw the hours, the tears, the way I aged before my time. But that was the point. I wanted him to have a life that didn't feel heavy. I wanted him to feel light. He was my sunrise and my worry, my reason for fighting and the weight I carried every day with pride. I gave him everything I had, and when that ran out, I gave more. There were times I didn't know how we'd make it through the week, but then he'd come home with a drawing from school or wrap his arms around my waist, and it would be enough. I never asked for anything in return. Not a medal, not a stage, not even recognition, just love. Just to know I still had a place in his heart as the years moved on. But somewhere between his wedding and that gathering, I vanished. Not all at once. No, that would have been too easy to name. It was slow, like paint fading in sunlight. Little moments, small forgettings, a missed call here, an invitation that never came. My name said with less warmth, my presence tolerated instead of welcomed. And then she came along. His wife's mother. She had the voice, the smile, the timing. She knew how to make people feel seen, everyone except me. She took up space without ever seeming to try. And somehow, in all her charm, she became the story he told himself about family. While I sat quietly, watching it all shift, not because I wasn't there, but because someone else rewrote the script and left me out of it. She had a way of walking into a room like she'd always belonged there, as if every chair pulled itself out just to seat her. She brought warm pies in perfect tins, spoke in a tone that always landed just right, and told stories like she was the star in all of them. I used to watch her from across the table, not with anger, but with the quiet ache of someone watching their name slowly being erased from the family book. She didn't mean harm, not in the way knives mean to cut. But her words, her presence, her confidence, they took up space, and none of it included me. Every holiday, every visit, she'd show up dressed just right, bringing gifts wrapped in ribbons, and somehow, without saying it outright, made it clear who belonged in the center and who was meant to stay by the wall. She remembered birthdays before I could, planned little getaways with my son and his wife, called it family time, and never once looked my way when she said it. I was invited, sure, but only the way you invite a neighbor who lives alone out of obligation. My chair was always at the end. My name mentioned only when someone needed to remember what not to do. One afternoon, she leaned toward me while we were all in the living room and with a soft smile said, "I know it must be strange, being the biological mother and all." Biological. Like I was a technicality, not his mother, just the one who delivered him. I remember nodding, lips pressed together because saying anything else would have made me look small. But something in me curled up that day, like fabric drawn too tight. She didn't say it with venom, she said it like it was a fact. A footnote. What hurt more was how he didn't flinch. He was standing right there, and he didn't say a word. He didn't correct her. He didn't say, "She's not just my mother, she's the one who gave everything." No, he smiled. A quiet, tired smile, like he agreed, or worse, didn't notice. And little by little, I saw the pieces of her in him. The way he laughed at her jokes, the way he quoted her, used her phrases, even told her stories like they were his. I heard him once, telling someone on the phone how lucky he was to have found a second mother who understood him. And I sat there in the kitchen, hands in the sink, listening as if I were hearing my own eulogy. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't spite. It was just grief in a new form. Grief for the space I used to hold, for the boy who once ran to me with every hurt, every joy. Now he ran to her. And I stood back, not because I wanted to, but because I had no place left to stand. He didn't push me away, he just stopped reaching. And in that silence, I became something quieter than forgotten. I became invisible. The table they'd set up near the front of the room was overflowing. Boxes in pastel paper, gold ribbons, tags with clever little poems, all stacked with care like a department store display. Each time a name was called, someone cheered, someone clapped, someone posed for pictures. The laughter was easy, flowing like sweet punch in a glass that never emptied. I stood there with my blanket in hand, waiting, not because I needed applause, but because I thought maybe, just maybe, there'd be a moment where my name would mean something again. But my name never came. Not once. I placed my gift down carefully, near the edge where it wouldn't get crushed, where someone might still see it later and wonder who had brought it. No one asked. No one noticed. It was just another square box to them, no different from the rest. But I knew every inch of that blanket. I had stitched it in silence, night after night, while my fingers burned and the pain in my knuckles made it hard to hold a spoon the next day. I pushed through each loop, not for recognition, but because it was all I had left to give. Something warm, something real, something for me. I picked colors that reminded me of his first nursery. I used a pattern I once saw in a magazine he brought home from school when he was 10. Every row was a memory, every corner sealed with quiet love. But on that day, to them, it was nothing special, just another wrapped object on a crowded table. I found a spot near the wall and tried to blend into the decor. My back ached from standing, but I stayed, thinking maybe I was just early in being seen. That maybe, before the end, someone would say my name. Maybe he would turn, even just for a second, and smile the way he used to when he saw me in the crowd at his school plays. But then he raised his glass. That's when I knew. The room hushed around him like a soft wave pulling everything in. He looked proud. He always had a way of owning a moment when he wanted to. And with one deep breath, he said it. He looked at her, his wife's mother, and said, "This is the woman I recognize as a true mother. I wish she had raised me. She will be the only real grandmother my son ever knows." The clapping came quick. So did the laughter. Some people looked around, smiling wide. Others nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. She pretended to act surprised, touched a hand to her chest, shook her head like it was too much. But she was glowing. She took it. All of it. And still, he didn't glance my way. Not even for a second. I felt my breath catch, but I held it. I pressed my lips together, like I had so many times before, and I stood still, holding nothing now. I had already placed my gift on the table, and somehow, it felt like I had placed my worth there too. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I knew that crying wouldn't give me back what I'd lost. I straightened my shoulders, turned without a sound, and made my way to the door. I didn't wave. I didn't say goodbye. I folded the edge of my dignity, tucked it under my arm like the corner of a shawl, and walked out with it. The air outside felt cooler than it had when I first arrived, or maybe it was just the shock settling in my bones. I walked slowly, steady, one foot in front of the other, my hands empty now, but my heart so full of silence it almost felt heavy enough to carry. No one called out behind me. No footsteps followed. No messages came through. The world inside that hall kept turning, spinning around, laughter and glasses raised, while I stepped further into the quiet, into a night that knew how to hold me without questions. The streetlights flickered above, casting long shadows that swayed with every step I took. I talked to myself, barely above a whisper, not to make sense of it, but to keep myself company. I thought of his second birthday, when he smashed cake into his own hair, and I laughed until my cheeks ached. I thought of the time he stood frozen on the school stage, unable to remember his lines, and I clapped louder than anyone else, just to bring him back. I thought of that one heartbreak in his teenage years, when he tried so hard to act like it didn't matter, but I found him curled up on the couch, holding the little necklace she'd left behind. I sat next to him, said nothing, just ran my hand across his back like I used to when he couldn't sleep as a boy. I remembered every tear I caught, every fever I cooled, every story I whispered to him when the night seemed too big for his small shoulders. And tonight, as I walked alone under a sky that had seen it all, I realized something I never wanted to admit. He hadn't just changed, he had outgrown his memory of me. Not because I had faded, but because something newer, something shinier, had taken up that space. And I let it. Slowly, quietly, year by year, I moved aside so he could build something of his own. I just never thought I'd be erased from the blueprint entirely. When I got home, I turned on the kettle and filled it with water. The sound of it heating, the soft pop of the switch, it all felt louder in the stillness. I didn't turn on the TV or any music. I didn't need noise. I needed to feel every bit of this moment, raw and honest. I poured the water into my cup, let the tea steep, and carried it to my chair by the window, the same chair I rocked him in when he was small, the same spot I sat when he left for college. The blanket I'd crocheted for the shower had been the last gift I'd made with that kind of care. And it would be the last one. I sipped my tea, then reached for the old wooden box I kept near the shelf. Inside were envelopes, stamps, a fountain pen I'd had for decades. I opened the first sheet of paper, placed it flat in front of me, and began to write. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with truth. Quiet, sharp truth that would arrive like a whisper and land like a stone. I sat there for a long while, pen in hand, the words slow to come but steady once they did. I didn't rush. Every sentence had weight, and I let it rest on the page like it deserved to be heard. I wasn't writing to hurt. I was writing so they'd understand what silence had been holding back. I told the truth, not the kind wrapped in politeness, but the kind that comes from watching your love be rewritten without your name in it. When I finished the letter, I placed it to the side, folded it carefully, and pressed it flat with my palm. Then I went to the cabinet in the hallway, the one I rarely opened. Inside was a small jewelry box, worn at the edges. I opened it slowly and looked at my mother's ring, the one she had passed to me with trembling hands the day I brought my son home from the hospital. It wasn't expensive, but it carried generations. I had always planned to give it to him to pass on one day, not because of tradition, but because it meant family. I placed it inside the package. Next came a bundle of drawings, tucked inside a soft cloth. Crayon sketches he made as a boy. Stick figures of us holding hands, a house with a garden, his crooked handwriting scrawled across the bottom that once read, "Me and Mom." I hadn't looked at them in years, but I knew every crease. I laid them flat, tied them with ribbon, and placed them beside the ring. Then came the paper that felt the heaviest of all. I opened the folder from my desk drawer, took out the legal documents, and stared at the signature line. I had spent years imagining how I'd leave what little I had to him, how he'd one day unlock the door to the beach house and remember me in every corner. But memories mean nothing when they're treated like clutter. I signed the revision. Clear, final, without shaking. The house, the account, the keepsakes, they would go elsewhere now. To someone, somewhere, who understood the weight of inheritance. I tucked the letter on top of it all and closed the box. It was a plain brown box. No ribbons, no markings. Just a package like any other, but inside it was the story they chose to forget, and the truth I could no longer carry alone. I tied it with twine, not out of sentiment, but because it was the strongest thing I had on hand. I placed it by the door and didn't sleep. I just waited for morning. As the sky began to lighten, I stepped outside. The air was cool and quiet. Not the kind of quiet that presses down, but the kind that lets you breathe. I walked to the post office without hurry, one block at a time, passing homes where lights were just starting to flicker on, where morning routines were beginning. I walked alone, but I didn't feel lonely. Not anymore. I handed the box over the counter, signed where they asked me to, and whispered to myself as I turned away. If you want a new family, I'll give you the freedom to have one. But you will not carry my name into a legacy you've erased me from. I don't know what they were doing that morning when the doorbell rang. Whether they were sipping coffee or laughing over something meaningless. Whether the house smelled of toast or fresh flowers from the day before. But I know the sound of the bell would have cut through their comfort just sharp enough to pause a conversation. He would have opened the door casually, not expecting anything unusual, probably still tired from the celebration, still basking in the glow of speeches made and roles cemented. Then he would have seen the courier, the box in plain brown paper, and signed without thinking. I imagine him carrying it inside, one hand under the weight, the other brushing it curiously as if trying to guess what was inside. Maybe he thought it was another gift. Maybe he assumed it came from someone who hadn't been able to attend. But the twine I tied around that package would have felt different under his fingers. Rough, deliberate, like something not meant to be decorative, but to hold something that shouldn't come loose. I wasn't there to see it, but I've played it out in my mind enough times to know. His wife standing nearby, arms crossed, curious but distant, watching him as he untied the knot. The tape giving way slowly. The first thing he sees, my handwriting. A letter on top. Folded, clean, unrushed. He opens it, and that's where the stillness begins. I don't know what face he made first. Shock, guilt, maybe just silence. But I know one thing, he felt it. Not just in his hands, but somewhere deeper. The kind of feeling that sinks, that tugs at the part of you that remembers what you tried so hard to forget. He keeps reading, slower now, his eyes no longer moving with ease, but with hesitation. She leans in, not close enough to read, but close enough to see something in him change. And then he reaches into the box. He lifts the drawings first, the ones with his own tiny handwriting, his name written in bright colors next to stick figures, each one holding hands, each one drawn during days when the world was smaller and love was simpler. His hand shakes as he holds them. Not from fear, from recognition, from the weight of remembering. Then the ring. He knows what it is. He's seen it before. Worn it on his fingers as a child when he played dress-up with my old jewelry box. He turns it over in his palm, and I imagine him trying to find some version of himself that still feels worthy of it. And then the document. The part they never expected. No need to explain what it is. The signatures speak louder than anything I could say. The weight of it settles between them like a stone. The room changes. I don't need to hear their voices to know that. His wife steps back, not because of fear, but because the space between them is no longer hers to stand in. And somewhere in that room, maybe on a nearby chair, maybe folded over a cushion, is the blanket. The one they left unopened. The one I crocheted for months. And now I imagine it's not just a gift. It's something he reaches for, not to unwrap, but to hold. Because sometimes when the truth arrives, it doesn't ask questions. It simply sits in the room, quiet and undeniable. The hours passed slowly that day. I didn't leave the house, didn't turn on the television, didn't open the curtains any more than I needed to. I just sat in my chair with my tea, the same spot I had written that letter from. The same chair I had rocked him to sleep in when the world felt too big for his small hands to hold. The phone sat on the table beside me, still and silent, its screen dark. I kept glancing at it without meaning to, not with hope, not with expectation, just instinct. But it never rang. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I knew better than to reach for something that may never come. I just thought maybe there'd be a pause, a breath, a moment where someone realized what silence had walked out the door with. I wasn't angry, not in the loud way people expect. No raised voice, no slammed doors, no sharp words thrown like stones. Just stillness. The kind that comes when you've said all you need to say and left the rest in the air, where truth can settle and speak for itself. I sat there and sipped my tea, the warmth of it curling around my fingers, while the quiet wrapped itself around the room. I thought about the weight of being the one who always gives, the one who carries the stories, the meals, the scraped knees, the sleepless nights, and the dreams that were never yours but still mattered more than your own. We give them everything, Our time, our years, our backs, our names, and somewhere along the way they forget the giver. They remember the comforts, the lessons, the open doors, but not the hands that built them. But I didn't chase. I didn't plead. That part of me had been quiet for a long time. There's a kind of strength that doesn't need to be seen to be real. It doesn't knock on doors that were already closed, and it doesn't beg to be remembered. It simply waits, steady, while the noise fades and the truth settles into place. That afternoon, I didn't call. I didn't write again. I didn't ask what he thought of what he read, or how she reacted, or whether they even finished the letter. I let the silence do what words never could. I let it speak. There's something funny about the way people look at things that don't belong to them yet, as if claiming it in conversation makes it theirs by default. For months before all this, they had been circling that old house by the shore like birds waiting for something to fall. It started with light questions. How often do you go down there these days? Is the roof still holding up? Do the gardenias still bloom in spring? Then came the requests. They asked for photos of the guest rooms, wanted to see how much space there really was, wondered aloud if the flooring could be redone in lighter wood. She once joked that the windows would look beautiful, with sheer curtains, maybe something soft and white, to let the sunlight pour through for pictures. They called it a retreat, a future space, a quiet place to raise the next generation. But they said it all with the kind of ease that made it clear. I was no longer part of the picture they were painting. They assumed, without asking, that one day the keys would be passed down with a nod, like it was part of the natural order. My name may have still been on the papers, but in their minds, it was already penciled out, waiting for a signature and a closing date. I watched it unfold quietly, the way I watched the tide change, gradual, certain, without apology. It was in the way he spoke about the drive down, how nice it would be to spend long weekends there, how peaceful it would be for them, how good for the baby. He never said, "Would you join us?" Never asked what I'd want. He talked like I was already gone. Not in body, but in relevance. What they didn't know was that the deed to that house had been folded neatly inside the box they opened that morning. Not just a copy, the document, with a seal and a signature and a quiet declaration. I had changed everything, every name, every line, every plan. That house wasn't going to them. Not anymore. It was going to someone who would never forget what it meant to be given something real. It would be donated, turned into a place for women like me who had given too much and been remembered too little. A space to breathe, to rest, to matter. I thought long and hard about that decision, and I didn't make it out of spite. I made it because legacy should mean more than inheritance. It should mean respect. And no one who looked at my life like it was just a list of assets was going to carry my name into the future. Not now. Not ever. It was 3 days later when I heard the knock. Not the kind that demands attention, not urgent or proud, just soft enough to make me pause and wonder if I imagined it. I opened the door, and there he stood, alone. No fanfare, no flowers, no wife trailing behind him with careful explanations or soft smiles. Just him, holding a bundle close to his chest, wrapped in the same blanket I had once placed on that crowded table without a single name being called. His eyes met mine, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. He didn't look the way he did the day of the toast. That lightness in him, the polished certainty, it was gone. What I saw instead was weight, heavy in his shoulders, in the way he held that child, in the way his lips parted like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the right beginning. I stepped aside, not with warmth, not with bitterness, just with the quiet that comes when something long awaited finally arrives. Even if it's too late to be what it once could have been. He came in slowly, the blanket still pressed close, and sat without asking, the way people do when they're not sure if they're welcome. I watched him for a moment, not with judgment, but with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you've already said what needed saying. He didn't speak right away, he didn't need to. His face said enough. His eyes weren't just tired, they were searching, like he was trying to find pieces of me he hadn't seen in years. Like he was remembering things he had buried so deep he forgot they were real. There were no long apologies, no rehearsed words. Just silence, and then tears, quiet ones. The kind that fall when pride finally lets go. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, like he used to when he was young and too stubborn to admit he was crying. And I sat across from him, steady, because I had already cried all my tears in the years leading up to that moment. I didn't reach for him. I didn't rush to comfort him. I let the moment breathe, because sometimes sorrow needs space to settle before it can be healed. He glanced down at the blanket, brushed his hand over the stitches like he understood them now, like he could finally feel what they had been trying to say all along. And when he looked back up at me, I knew. He saw me. Not as a shadow in the corner, not as the woman who once fed him and faded into the background, but as his mother. Not perfect, not loud, just present. And that, after everything, was enough. He sat there for a long while. Eyes low, hands folded over that small bundle like it was the only steady thing he had left. I could see the words forming before they ever left his mouth, the kind that take more courage to say than most people will ever admit. When he finally looked up, his voice was low, and there was no polish left in it, no pride, no practiced rhythm, just truth. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I forgot what love looked like without an audience," and that was all it took. Not because those words could erase what had been said before, or undo the weight of what had already been lost, but because they came from a place that remembered. A place that had once known the warmth of my arms, the comfort of my cooking, the steadiness of my voice in the dark. A place that had once been mine, before life filled his head with noise and faces that clapped louder than I ever could. I reached forward, slowly, not for him, but for the little one he held, wrapped in the blanket my fingers had shaped night after night. He placed that small body into my arms with a tenderness I hadn't felt from him in years. I didn't take the child to claim a title. I didn't need to be called anything. I held him because he was soft and breathing and warm, and because somewhere in that heartbeat I could feel the rhythm of what once was, and maybe, just maybe, what still could be. We sat in silence, not the kind that fills a room with distance, but the kind that holds a thread of peace between two people who've both been hurt, and both are trying, in their own way, to come back to something real. He didn't mention the house. Not once. He didn't ask if the papers could be reversed or if I might reconsider. He knew. Some doors you close not out of anger, but to protect the light inside, to keep safe the parts of yourself you almost let them forget. He looked at me like a man who had finally learned that legacy isn't something you take, it's something you earn. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel invisible. I just felt seen. They may never see me as the matriarch with pearls around her neck and perfect dinners on the table, not the woman who commands attention at every gathering or tells stories that draw a room into applause. I don't move with elegance or charm the way she does. My hands are rough from years of work, my back bent from carrying what no one else would, and my voice isn't loud, but it's steady. I may not wear the title they give her, but I'm the one who stayed. Through every storm, every lonely night, every unspoken ache, I stayed. When there was no applause, when there were no eyes watching, I stayed. I was there for the sleepless nights, for the scraped knees and broken dreams. I was the one who caught him when he fell and stood behind him when he didn't know where to go next. These days, my life is quieter, but not empty. I tend to my garden, pulling weeds with the same patience I once used to untangle his hair after a long day at school. I plant herbs by the window, ones he used to wrinkle his nose at, but now asks me how to grow. I sleep through the night now, not because nothing weighs on me, but because I've learned the difference between being tired and being at peace. Peace doesn't mean everything is fixed. It just means you're no longer carrying what isn't yours to hold anymore. He visits from time to time, not to ask for anything, not to prove anything, just to sit, sometimes with his head down, sometimes with stories to share, and I listen, not as someone who's trying to be invited back in, but as someone who knows she never truly left. He doesn't stay long, but he stays differently now. He brings with him a quiet kind of respect, the kind that isn't spoken but felt in the way he watches me trim the rosemary or folds the napkin after eating something I made. He asks questions he never used to ask. About my health, about my days, about how I managed to raise him on so little and still give him so much. I don't always answer with words. Some things you teach just by being. He still calls her Mom. I've heard it. Sometimes it still stings just for a moment, the way salt stings a healing wound. But that feeling passes, because I know what I am. I'm the reason he breathes. I'm the quiet hands that built the foundation he stands on. I'm the name he may not say often, but one that lives in every story he tells about how he became the man he is. And I don't need to be in the spotlight to know that. I just need to keep being the woman who stayed, even when no one saw her doing it. If you've ever felt like you were slowly written out of your own story, like the chapters you lived and breathed were handed to someone else with cleaner hands and a louder voice, then you understand what I'm saying. If someone else wore the crown you carved with your own struggle, with your quiet sacrifices, with years no one ever thanked you for, then hear me when I tell you this. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it's where strength begins. Sometimes it's how you start rewriting your name, not in bitterness but in gold. If someone ever tried to take your place in the life you built, tell me below. I'm listening. And if you've ever had to walk away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself, you're not alone. Stay with me, speak with me. And if this story felt like yours too, then subscribe. Not for me, but for every quiet woman who stayed, gave everything, and refused to be erased. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video. More love from Granny.